Pensado's Place is brought to you by
House of Rock giveaway, part 2 of JJP and a man named Frank. You're at the place. It's Pensado's Place.
Hey everybody, welcome. A man named Frank. So that's me, in case you don't know, that's my first name. My middle name's actually David, and not, as some might think, hard drive. But what's up, Herbert?
How are you, man?
I'm doing good.
How was your week?
So far, so good.
Yeah.
Everything's been great. Great.
Yeah, kind of.
Trying to think of something I did other than mix, but had a good week mixing. You know, when you do this for a living, your entire life is you figure out good and bad based on how your mixes sound. So I had some good mixes. It was a good week.
You had a good week, yeah.
You know, I go into severe depression when I don't like what I do.
Yeah, but you've been on a roll. I must say, I'm obviously a little bit biased, but
Me too, actually.
You've been smoking.
Thanks, man.
And so many good things going on with
You
the show.
okay?
What's that?
Are you okay?
Yeah. No, I'm excited. We have lots of exciting
Are
stuff.
you giving me Thanksgiving off? Do I have that off tomorrow?
No.
Okay.
We're taping tomorrow and Friday. I'm going to have turkey sandwiches, though. Is that okay?
Oh, well, last year you made me eat at Subway.
Well, that was,
A turkey sub.
processed turkey.
It works, you know.
This year we have a little bit more budget. We're getting a real bird. So why don't we get to the homework? We got great guests and stuff going on.
Absolutely.
So guys,
Me.
of course, a man named Frank. We're obviously coming to you from the Art Institute of California, Los Angeles. Happy to be here in our beautiful HD studio. Guys, you know where to contact us. Make sure you do that. Facebook, Twitter, the usual channels. Go to YouTube, go to our website, and we'll communicate with you. We had a really interesting conversation with one of our guys, Leo. You talked to him on Skype?
Leo over Skype.
Right.
Cool guy. For those that don't know, he did our introduction and
Great conversation. And by the way, here's a big shout out to one of our lovely groups that we love so much, Pensado students. We don't talk about them enough, but they're a fantastic group. They self-regulate what's going on. So join that if you want to. Let's say hello to Vintage King. You know, they are sponsoring this great special programming that we're having today and we had last week. We love the guys there. So Chevy and Tommy Memrath and all the gang. We got Drew Towson in the chat room. You got to stump the VK guy question?
Yeah. Back in the day, I'd never turned my computer off, literally, sometimes for 2 or 3 years at a time, and I never had any issues. Now I turn my computer off and on every day, and I, from time to time, have issues. Should I just leave my computer and other electronic equipment on 24/7, 365, or should I turn it off at the end of the day? It seems to me like the parts would heat up, expand, and go bad quicker than if you just left it on all the time, unless maybe hard drives. But anyway, tell me.
All right, Drew, go and answer that question for us, and we'll make that happen. Our beautiful House of Rock giveaway that Vintage King is behind. This studio is incredible. If you can get to Santa Monica, you have an opportunity to get into the contest and win. The Vintage King provided all this incredible outboard gear. When you get there and you see the studio, I call it the Starship Enterprise, that overhead rack.
500 series pieces that have like 60 or 80
Yeah,
or
something like 60,
crazy.
60 pieces of 500 series gear. It's in this incredible overhead console. They have lots of other stuff.
did a great job.
They really did. So you want to win? You want to enter to win this? Last week to enter, VintageKing.com/House of Rock. Make sure you get in there. It's a great opportunity to have.
Second place is a good price too.
Which is what?
Oh, they meet us at Subway tomorrow over on Coldwater.
It's not quite the same as a tour with JJP, but close.
It's Dutch though.
That's right. Make sure you get a chance to enter that if you can. We'd love to see you over there. And our avid friends. Want to take a quick moment.
Yeah, that's a special thing. Huh?
Yeah, let me tell you how blessed we are because of you guys. First of all, we have sponsors like Vintage King and Avid that make this show possible for you. They've been incredibly supportive, and part of what we like about them is we like the people. A couple weeks ago, we had the incredibly brilliant Bobby Lombardi on, and one of the things that I asked him about was an email I had received from a sight impaired engineer named Slough Halayton. I'm not sure I'm saying his name right.
I don't know.
Anyways, the premise of it was Slough wanted to see if he was talking to Avid about updating Pro Tools and making it, voice activated and things that sight impaired could utilize it. And he had done a great job. He'd pulled together a meeting with the Avid folks and Apple people. Avid had been very responsive, and he had reached out to us to see if we'd contact Stevie Wonder. I replied to him and said, "You're doing a great job. They're a great corporation. Why don't you see what happens and you follow through? And then if we need to try to contact somebody, we will." They had the meeting. Slough sent me an email this week where Gary Greenfield, the CEO of Avid, sent him an email personally, said that they are absolutely going to address this issue. They need time to get it together. But this is an example of a corporation that is not too big to fail. He didn't have a lieutenant send the email. The CEO sent the email. Congratulations to Slough for pushing it. That's about empowering you guys to make change, and it's about a corporation being responsible and responsive and human, and that is tremendous.
Well said, my friend. Well
Right?
said, yeah.
Well
Absolutely.
done, Avid. Love you for that. So get to their website, and alwaysavid.com. Wonderful stuff. And by the way, they're talking about some cool stuff with us for them. We can't talk about it yet, but we're kind of excited, right?
Well, the $1 million giveaway I like that, and then spend a week at your house with you. That's a good. Is that too early to give that away?
Well, no, let's clarify. The $1 million is coming from Dave, not from Avid. So, all right, lots of good stuff. Thanks for being here. Why don't you introduce the ITL and let's get to it.
Okay, guys. It's somewhat self-explanatory, but I'm going to explain it anyway because that's what I do. I'm showing you a technique for 80s snare, but this technique, use your imagination while you're watching this. I mentioned at the end you can use it with kick drums and trigger a 40-50 cycle tone in tune with your song. But check it out. A lot more uses than what you see. Over the years, our profession of recording has changed. Like sometimes we are so thoroughly immersed in the equipment, the technology, and the techniques and sounds of today that we forget that those came from somewhere. Now, back in the day, 50s, 60s, and even 70s, it was more about mic placement, capturing the sound in the room, great players. And then the 80s were somewhat, to my way of thinking, and this is open for interpretation, and please disagree, talk amongst yourselves. 80s were kind of a bit of a transitional period. Synthesizers were coming into their own, drum machines were coming into their own, and it seemed like experimentation was going on a little more. Now, I wasn't recording prior to the mid-80s or so I can't speak to that time period. I'm just saying it from my perspective, and of course, I'm prejudiced because I started in the 80s, so to me that was a great time, just like the 2013s is going to be a great time. And in that grand tradition, a sound kind of evolved in the 80s for snare drums where we wanted a particular sound, something in the air. Phil Collins kind of changed the way we thought about snares and the parameters of that. And then drum machines came along. They were a little sterile. So guys started trying to do certain things. Now I'm going to show you the classic technique for snare. Okay, here's my live snare. A little bit of a gate on it. And then here's the bottom end part of that snare. They used to like lots of bottom end in the 80s. So what we did was we would take a signal generator. Here's a signal generator, just a stock one, and we'd set it on a certain frequency, a certain level. But this is actually pink noise. So like it says here, so this is what you would hear if I took the gate off. Now what I've done is I've gated that pink noise with, let's see, bus 47, with the snares. And so every time a snare hits, I get a little bit of pink noise. And then we would add a little bit of reverb. I'm using Dream Verb just to get a little, I'm not quite sure why. I just felt like seeing something purple today. So I added that reverb to the snare sound. Excuse me, I added it just to the pink noise. Why did I spend so much time showing you this? Because another classic technique back then was to do the same exact thing with a snare drum, but instead of adding pink noise, you would tune to a frequency with the signal generator that was in tune with your song. And there's charts that will convert key to frequency. And so then you'd like, I used to like 40, 50 cycles in there, and then we'd add that kind of 808 sounding low end back into the kick drum and gate it the same way. And then there was numerous applications of that. But I was working on this with my friend Dave Huff, and thought I'd share it with you. I think it's kind of cool. All right, guys. When I first started using that technique I just showed you, I couldn't afford a signal generator, so I would just take a radio, put it on FM station, and tune it in between the dials. And so to get that hiss, I got the in between the FM stations, so it was like shh. Then that's what I gated. But use your imagination and email me some new tricks that you've used with that technique. I always enjoy hearing from you guys. So Herbert,
Frank.
What's your middle name?
It's crazy. I will not tell you.
Come on, man.
It's actually
Let's
Arlington.
have a contest to guess your middle name.
No, it's terrible. But I'll give you. No, there's a clue that I could give. I used to give it. I'll share it later. Let's get to the good stuff. Again, Vintage King, thanks so much for bringing this to our guests. This is part 2 of the legend JJP and a man named Frank David Pensado. Part 2 of the House of Rock interview.
I could try to imagine myself in that position. Ron Fair, obviously veteran record producer with a tremendous amount of success, and actually does know what he's doing.
Oh yeah.
And then Mary J. Blige, you know,
one of the greats.
she's not a moron by any chance.
And Mary had total faith in me. That's what makes it even much harder.
So what do you do?
She trusted me.
Mary comes in and says,
well, Mary came in and asked me to make some changes. I made the changes. Then she left, and then when Ron came back in to listen to the mix, I pointed out what I had done, and then in that situation, I wanted to make sure that Mary's voice was heard, and that I represented her to Ron. Now she's totally capable of doing that herself. At that point in time, she didn't have a real lengthy relationship with him, and so I explained to Ron that she was upset and upset was truly the word, with some of the tail ends of some of the phrases had gotten tweaked a little differently than she had sung them, and that was what was bothering her. And so I reverted to the original in about maybe 10 words, and I pointed them out to Ron, and he was comfortable with all but one, I think, and he left them. And I dodged a bullet on that one. Ron is like us. He's very, he wants the artist to be happy. But his job is a little different than ours. His job is not just creative, but he's got responsibilities at the label. That was a tough one. Most of the time, I don't have that. Most of the time, it's between the artist and the producer for me. The labels rarely show up to anything.
right. It's a really difficult
It's very difficult.
position to be in.
One of the reasons I'm avoiding giving you a concrete answer on some levels is because it changes with every client. When I say client, I mean artist, producer, and record company. There's some producers that have so much power that there's no point in implementing suggestions from the label, because that producer is going to come in and change it anyway, and that producer has so much power that they're just not gonna. They can do whatever they want. Label takes what they get. I was doing something with Timbaland, and that was the case. Timbaland got what he wanted, so there's no point in trying to please anyone but him. And he's a very, very strong, very narrow lane that you're given to work with him, because when you get something from him, it's exactly what he wants. He just needs it enhanced. So every situation is different, every client's different, and it's a broader thing that we can discuss here, Jack. You and I both know that we can see a young starting out engineer, and without even hearing anything they've ever done, we can predict pretty accurately how far they're going to go in our profession just by their demeanor and their personality. Mm-hmm. So much of what we do and the success that we've had is a function of our personality. If you can't read minds, if you're not psychic, if you don't know how to get your way without making anybody upset, if you don't know how, I always tell my assistants, if you go into a room of 30 strangers that have never seen you before, if that room catches fire and they instinctively look to you for what to do, then you can do this at this level.
That's exactly right.
You have to project confidence without projecting arrogance. And all those years of playing all those little dives on every club in the world, pleasing people. I did gigs sometimes. I did a gig one time in front of some Hell's Angels, and I didn't know we were a mixed band. It was half black, half white, and I didn't even know what they liked. And a mistake there, you die. It's not
right.
It's not. So I saw what looked to be the leader of the group. So first song, I grabbed his girlfriend and said, "Let's do a Grateful Dead song. Do you know the words?" She said, "I know some of the words." So I brought her up on stage. It was a 1-4-5, so it was real. We just improvised it. She sang the most horrible version, but nobody in the room could boo because it was the leader's girlfriend. So we got a standing ovation, and we finished the night. Actually, got asked back. But you have to know when to hold them, when to fold them, I guess, to be corny. And personality is so important.
And you bring up reading the room.
Mm-hmm.
There's reading the room in terms of the client.
Absolutely.
So, are they tapping? Are they not tapping?
Mm-hmm.
How are they tapping? Are they tapping 16ths, 8ths, quarters?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Do you do the thing where I keep the bar marker in big when they're doing this and I go, okay, bar 25.
Absolutely. Something's not right.
Something's not right at bar 25.
And they don't even know it.
Yeah, or they'll
Right?
go, you know what, I heard something, go, oh, bar 25, yeah, let's go back here. And they go, how'd you know that? I'm like, oh, it's my job. Yeah, you watch the room. You definitely
And
watch
besides
the room.
watching the room the way we just described it,
Mm-hmm.
there's also what the room is telling you technically.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So, you're listening to, say, a drum sound that you're working on, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're listening to it, and you're trying to decide about the bass drums.
Mm-hmm.
There's 5 bass drum samples, let's say.
Yeah, I
And-
had 10 recently.
Okay, 10, let's take 10.
Right, yeah.
And there's the visual perspective of whether they're in phase or not, right? Because you now have a screen to look at, right? And then there's the way they sound. Even if they are in phase, maybe one out of phase is better for whatever reason, right? But the room and even the console can tell you something. So if your arm is leaning against the console, right?
You said that on the show.
Do you ever feel that? I want to talk about
do
that.
now.
I wanted to ask you about that.
I'd never done that, but I do now.
Because I said it in the show, and you
Yeah.
didn't, and I thought, I wonder what his perspective is. I always wanted to ask you this question.
I feel certain things, sometimes physically and sometimes emotionally, but I had never listened for low end by touching something vibrating. And when you said that, I started trying it at my place, and I was getting confused by other things, so I thought, well, why not just listen to the low end? So I created a system where I just hit a button, and all I monitor is my sub, and I keep my sub on full range, which means it's going from about 200 down to DC. So my mind isn't cluttered by anything else in the frequency spectrum, just the low end. So I'll sit there and I'll EQ the low end by just listening to the sub and feeling the vibrations of the sub and doing like you told me to do. And it kind of isolates it. Now, at Larrabee, that's not as big a need because it's a tuned room, but my project studio is a smaller room, and you can get confused easily by some of the things that are going on in that room. It happens to translate really well, and I've had several successful records on the radio from it. But I had to develop this technique because I wasn't able to do the kind of surgery in that 40, 80, 60 range that I needed to do that's so important for credibility in a mix, you know? So that little sub technique, I've shown it to a couple of friends, and they're all finding it very useful. It really kind of is neat. Now, if you don't have a sub, I took a McDSP F2 plugin and created a preset so that if I'm in another studio and I don't have the sub, I can just roll off everything above 200 in a certain way, and it gives me kind of the same feeling. Now, what you can do to make it even more effective is spend 5 minutes a day and just listen to 4 or 5 songs through just the sub, and you get a feel. Mark that volume on your system. I use an Avocet. I have a mark, and so I listen at the same volume. The music's coming in off a Moog at the same 0 level, and I get a feeling for what mixes should sound like from 200 down. So now I rarely have mastering engineers touch anything frequency-wise on my mixes because I can monitor pretty accurately down to 20 cycles.
That is absolutely genius.
You're funny.
It's amazing. I love it.
One of the things I noticed, Jack, was here again at Larrabee, you can kind of work on the entire frequency spectrum at one time, but I noticed in my project studio, I have to kind of split the frequency spectrum up, so I have different speakers that tend to do certain things well. Like the NS10s are excellent from like maybe 400, 500 to somewhere around 6, 7K. They're pretty good, but they're very precision. They're almost like a microscope. You don't really get to see or feel much from them. They just scream at you. Put the snare here. They scream at you. Make the snare sound like this. Or hey, dumbass, you think that vocal sounds right? But I found that if I have my R tones about 10 feet, about 5 or 6 feet away from me, off to one side, very close together, I find that they kind of tell me emotional things I need to know, and so I can work on mid-range things in those, but kind of a lower mid without the hype of the top. For example, if I've got a vocal that sounds kind of like that 2.5K, on the NS10s I have a tendency to put that vocal a little too low because of the microscopic quality, whereas the R tones, they just disregard all that, and you can just get your balances and your levels just perfect on those. And then normally I have another set of speakers in the back of my room facing the back of my head, and they're more low full range, and I'll hit those kind of to get above the 200 or kind of hear the integration of what I've done on just the sub alone. And then I've got a pair of KRKs that I use from about 10K up, and so I'll try to focus on those frequencies because I know what I'm listening to on those individual components. Now, it can get a little bit disconcerting and a little bit disjointed in terms of a creative flow, but once you do it for a week or two, you're not listening in terms sometimes of the song, you're listening to components. Now, when you go to listen to the aggregate of all of those different components, you want to stick on the NS10s, of course, or Pro Axe like we have here or whatever. But at some point in time, you're in microscope mode and you want to hear the different elements. And so like, let's say, what I do is I send my drums through one aux, I send my keyboards through an aux, guitars through an aux, bass through an aux, vocals through an aux. And so sometimes I'll just work on just all the keyboards, and so I'll get everything kind of sorted out. I'll go to the R tones for that and make sure that they're all working together. And I'm not one on carving and cutting. I just try to make them sound good together. I think of them as competing for space, and not just sonically but physically in the mix. So I might do my panning on those keyboards and get them all working right. And if there's several keyboards that are hard to hear and distinctly with each other, I'll find the part of the frequency spectrum that gives me the most emotion, the most feeling. And so then I'll take everything out I don't need, and then combine that and then start adding it back a little bit at a time on the R tones until I've reached the saturation point again where it's starting to sound cloudy together. The low end, I'll make sure if it's a rock song, I'll let the bass win the battle. If it's a hip hop song, I'll let the kick win the battle. But I try to make things coexist. And I don't know if you do this, but I don't think in terms of EQing as much as I think in terms of different parts of the frequency spectrum give me different feelings. Like guitar gives me power, so that mid-range, that 2K, that 1K, I think power, but yet credibility comes from the low end. You show me a rock song without a good solid bottom, and I'll show you like a jazzy rock song. It's not really a rock song. The low end, 200 down, that's where the power of the credibility of the mix is. And then the high frequencies, that can make you feel like it's a pop song or it's an artsy song or whatever. So the frequencies aren't there just to make the record sound good. They're there to impart different emotional feelings that we've been taught. We're taught media, and so we can play as a mixer. We can play with that. You're looking at me like I'm crazy.
No, what's going through my mind is I wanted to ask you, out of the three frequencies, if we look low, mids, and highs, which one's the most important band?
Mids.
Why?
Well, if you think about it, as humans, we're designed to hear speech. Everything about our ears is designed to hear speech. That's been important in our existence forever. So we all familiar with the Fletcher-Munson curves and stuff like that. I can create different emotions by the way I manipulate the mid-range. There was a mixer who was real famous we discussed earlier, and I used to kid him. I used to say, man, when you turn one of your mixes up, it just gets louder. When you turn one of my mixes up, you got to make a decision. Either you got to leave the room, you're going to do something, because the mid-range is where it's what distinguishes a jazz song from a rock song. It distinguishes a folk song from a gospel song. The mid-range is probably the most useful and the most misunderstood and misused frequency spectrum, part of the frequency spectrum that we have. And oddly enough, with the advent of earbuds and laptops, we're now, as a collective group of engineers, we're now putting in a little more 1-2K than we ever have before, because it just sounds better to us, because we're dealing with MP3s that absorb a little bit of that mid-range. We're dealing with speakers that don't reproduce it quite as well. And then we're dealing with a society and a culture that just has evolved to where they want to hear a little more mid-range. In the 90s, it was all about sub and low and that, but even the hip-hop guys are getting rolled off at 40 cycles, 50 cycles now, because they would rather have their mixes louder than fatter. And so the mid-range has kind of won the battle in the last 4 or 5 years. The high frequencies have gone up a little bit, but from about 40 down, we're as a collective society, we're about 3 or 4 dB lower than we were in the 90s.
When you talk about mid-range, can you tell me from what frequency roughly to what frequency you would consider mid-range?
I can. I started to think about, put this on Facebook and get everybody's opinion about these terms that we use, because there's really there's nowhere where is there somewhere where by law, when you say low mids, what that's from what to what, or when you say...
I don't think so.
I think we all use it differently.
Yeah.
In terms of mid-range, I usually think 1K, 2K. In terms of a range, I think for me, mid-range probably starts at around 800, might go to a 3K, and I'd say then low mids might be that gap between low end, which I would say starts somewhere around 200, and might go to 600. So that gap there would be low mids, and then lows would probably start at 200. For me, upper mids would start at 3K, maybe go to 4K, and then highs might be 5K and up.
It's interesting.
I don't know that anybody knows the right answer. I think we use them generally, those terms, but I don't think anybody's ever truly defined them. Maybe they did at Berkeley or somewhere. But
what I find interesting about your work as a fan is that, when I think of different guys, I think they have certain areas covered better than others.
I
Right?
do too.
So,
I do too.
but when I think about you, to me, if we talk about the 4 bands that you sort of just outlined, you actually nail all 4.
Oh, thanks.
And now I'm like, now I understand. And hearing you speak today, I understand why you nail all 4.
You have to. They're all
Right?
so critical to the emotional feeling you get from a song.
But even technically, the way that you've okay, I got a sub that does this, and I have overtones that do this, and I have my high-end, KRKs that I look at this particular frequencies from here to here, as you said, 10 and up. That is why when I listen to it, I'm like, nope, lower mid-range is perfect. Bottom is as good as it gets. Real low, extended, clear, punchy, never murky, ever.
Thank you.
And sparkling top end, more importantly, natural feeling.
Yeah.
Never feels like, oh, someone just stuck an equalizer and cranked. Just feels like you don't even think about the high frequency. It just goes out.
Yeah.
Going back to what you just said, why are the overtones close? You said they have to be close.
Because I don't want to have any panning issues coloring my decisions. They're just for emotion, and sometimes I'll darken the room at that point too, just to deselect some of my senses. So I'm just working on an emotional level.
I was wondering if you could give me your feelings and feedback and opinions about mixing in the box versus mixing on a digital or an analog console.
Yeah, I used to do a lot of carpentry work and construction work in between gigs, because you could go to the pawn shop, buy some used tools, walk out on a job, work, get paid at the end of the day. And I never heard a carpenter worry about what tools they were using. They were always more concerned with the house they built. I think the box versus not the box, I think a person should learn how to become very comfortable and very good at every tool that's available to them. I think a young cat coming along today should make every effort to master every console. When I first moved to LA, Jack, there were guys that could only work on Neves. There were guys that only could work on SSL. I tried to master both. I even mastered oddball consoles just because I was an engineer. That's my job. I started working in the box with Rhett Lawrence. I did Miss Independent, Kelly Clarkson in the box 100 years ago. And I went to Rhett and intentionally tried to become part of his team because I wanted to learn in the box. It was just another tool for me. It was a method to work. I don't get involved in what sounds better, what doesn't sound better. Everything I do sounds good to me. So what makes something sound good to an engineer is applying his taste and his skills to it. If you can't get the same sound you want from whatever tools you're given, then you need to work a little harder and get your engineering skills together. I've heard a lot of your work. You sound like Jack Joseph when you're working on an SSL, when you're working on a Neve, when you're working in a multi-million-dollar facility, when you're working in less than that. You always sound like Jack Joseph because that's what you do. You listen to the speakers and you make it sound like you want it to sound. The tools are less important. So most guys that complain about one system or another, they've spent 40 years on one, 4 months on the other, and so they're trying to make a comparison. I've been working in the box since '94. It's not that big a deal to me.
So you don't approach it any differently?
I approach it from an emotional level. There's sonic differences, but I work past those. You work with what you're given. And I think the box has transformed our industry and made the process so much more accessible. There was a time when you and I couldn't get into a studio. It was not available to us. There's no way we could have gotten into a major studio. Now a cat can take 20 grand and go buy everything we use just about. Well, not our outboard gear, but they can get started pretty good. And I think that's a wonderful thing. I think that having access to more people to the process gives a better product. It simultaneously gives a much worse product. So at a time when some of the greatest music's being made now, some of the worst music's being made, and we don't have the record executives that can sort through that and find the wheat from the chaff, that's the problem.
You told me that some of your co-workers at Larrabee work in the box. So, of course, the first thing that comes to my mind is, why are you working in the box when you're sitting behind, whatever it is, a 70, 80, 90, 100 input SSL, and the consoles are sitting there effectively holding your cup of coffee at that point, right?
Yeah.
So why would someone make that decision?
Well, multiple reasons. I can't speak for everybody, particularly the guys at Larrabee, but I know in my case, I had my console there. I have my console there, and then I've got my Pro Tools rig. The console does very little of the heavy lifting, but it just looks good. I like it. It sums, and there's a different sound, a little bit slightly different sound in the old Pro Tools when you sum through a console. Some people find that sound pleasing. Some people find it not as modern as an in-the-box sound. I've got some clients that specify in the box because they like that modern sound. And so there's different uses. There's different hybrid versions. Think of the way we work at Larrabee as a Prius. It's not quite a electric car, it's not quite a gas car, but you try to utilize the best of both worlds. So some songs, myself personally, I'm 95% in the box, and the console is just doing basic monitoring. Some songs I'll spread. I'll take 40 faders, and I've got 80, and I'll take half of them, and I'll feed like the drums to 2 faders, backgrounds to 4 faders, leads to 2 faders, and on and on and on. And then another use of the console is for our analog gear, like a lot of the effects we bring back, and you run those just on the console. But it all leaves 2 little garden hoses out of the console and comes back into Pro Tools again. So it's probably the biggest thing is access to outboard gear, which we use a lot of.
And you'd rather do it with the console insert as opposed to?
Don't have a choice.
Don't have a choice.
Whatever my client can afford, whatever they want, I'll use. Now, for me personally, I love being in a big-ass $20 million facility with people buzzing around me, grabbing me my coffee and doing everything for me. I'm the queen bee and everybody's buzzing around me, and client walks in and I look like I know what I'm doing. I got this big console there. I mean, of course, who wouldn't want to do that?
So let me ask you this then.
That's not the world we live in now.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a moment from the perspective that if you're mixing in your project studio, the chances are less, possibly, I'm assuming here, that the client, whether that be the A&R person, the producer, or band members, depending on the scenario, may not visit the session, right?
Yeah.
So if we think about the sessions that people used to come and visit more, right?
Yeah.
That interchange where someone says to you they feel X, Y, or Z, that you interpolate as, yes, you are correct about those things, or maybe you're not, but those things make you think of something else. That exchange is different now, right?
It totally is. I mean,
How do you feel about that?
I like having people there. I work, but I don't work good alone. I don't like being alone. I like having my clients there, but sometimes I don't like having my clients there all the time. I like them in calculated doses. My mixes don't always sound good all the time. There's big chunks, probably about 70% of the time I'm working, where I can see terror on their faces. I paid all this money and this is what I'm getting. So I'd rather have those moments alone to myself. But there's certain parts of the mix where the process is much better when I have the creative people there with me, because then we're a team, we can do things. So I try to control the environment where I invite them to the project studio, but I make sure that I time it so that it's when I need them and I'm not being embarrassed, because you don't want them the first thing they hear to be bad. You want the first thing they hear to be good. It just sets the tone for the day. But the reality of the world we live in is we all have clients now from Europe and Asia that we never had that before, and I think that's healthy because it's broadened my skill base. It's given me exposure to a lot of things I'd never been exposed to. In the 90s, I was in a pretty heavy pop world, and now I just did a project called D Mechanic. These guys from Central America opened my eyes up to a lot of new things. I mean, I learned a lot, and they were with me 12 hours a day. And there were times when I would ask them, guys, can I have a little time alone, you know? And they understood, and it worked out great. It's a new world, man.
Do you have any inspirations or aspirations that you haven't accomplished yet that you'd like? Dreams which you still want to do?
Audio related, mix related?
Anything you just feel like, this is something I really want to see accomplished before it's all said and done.
Yeah, I'd like to do the perfect mix. I'd like to get the most low end in a record that's ever been gotten. I'd like to have a mix that just was universally loved by everyone. I mean, kind of unattainable, lofty goals, but they're what we try to do. I'm not a save the world kind of guy. I'm not that person. I'm not very political. Actually, I don't like politicians, but my goals are more, I guess, humanitarian. You know, I'd love to see the respect restored to our profession. It's gone away a little tiny bit. I think until you actually try to work at our level and at the capacity we work at, I don't think you can truly understand how gifted guys like you and Manny, Jason, Serban, all the top guys, Fabian, I don't think you can really tell how gifted they really are until you sit down and try to duplicate what they do. And in the old days, mix engineers weren't that revered. But the time in the 90s, we were kind of rocking it there. We had a little status. And I'd like to see that restored a little bit, the faith and confidence in us, because to a person, I don't know anyone that doesn't try to make great records, you know, that's at the top. They struggle hard. Nobody that I know all the guys, not a single person doesn't try to make great records. And the public can't hear a lot of what we do, so they think they can do it themselves, and they can't. It's like every kid on the basketball court thinks he can sit down and take on Michael Jordan until he actually gets on the court with Michael Jordan. You go, oh my God, this guy's fast. And I'd like to see that come back to our profession, but you know, on a philosophical level, I'm not real happy with some of the struggling people are going through. I'd like to see a little bit more prosperity come back to our culture. I think it's good for everybody and everything.
When you lay things out on a console, on an analog console specifically, do you think about where those things are sitting?
I do.
And can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. Mixing is like driving a car. When you drive a car to work, you don't think, okay, if I turn this wheel 4 degrees to the left, I'll avoid this small child that's crossing the road. If I put my brakes on now, it becomes automatic. So to me, the technical part of the process needs to be out of the way, seamless. I don't want to think about it. You know yourself, when you grab an EQ, you don't go, okay, let me hit 2 dB at 3K. You just turn the knob. You know from experience that what you're hearing in your head can be accomplished by just letting your body turn the knob the right amount. Like, I teach my assistants, if someone says, can you make that vocal a little louder, you should do it the first time. You should grab that fader and put it the exact amount louder it needs to be. It shouldn't take you twice. You should do it one time. You were taught that when a guy walks in to sing a vocal, you should get it right, but the first note should be capturable and reusable. We were taught those kind of skills. So for me, it's removing the typewriter part of the process and let my ideas flow, and anything that accomplishes that. So I tend to put the things that I'm going to address the most. I put my lead vocals on 25, 26. I put my background vocals next to that over on the left. The closest thing to me are the drums, and then next to that are what I think are the most important keyboard parts. If it's a rock song, the guitar parts. In other words, I can I cannot move any more than, I cannot move any more than the width of my body and touch all the important things. Like one cymbal crash in the song, it gets down on the end, you know? And I might actually have to stand up to address it. But I try to remove the process so that my creativity can just, because what we do is you and I we don't think about EQ, we don't think about this or the other, we think about the sound, we hear it in our head, and we just do things until it comes out the speaker sounding exactly like what's in our head. We forget the process. I was talking to Tony Maserati Wednesday, and Tony was having trouble remembering some of the things he'd done on some of the older songs like More Money, More Problems, because that's not the way we think. We don't think in terms of what we're doing. He had a vision in his head of what he wanted to sound like. He goes into a mode to do that and comes out of that mode 30 minutes later and it sounds like that. So I try to remove the thinking part of the process on everything I do creatively.
There's been times in my career where one example I think of is when I walked into Sunset Sound Factory once, and I was actually there to pick up a friend. We were going to dinner that evening, and the session was running late, and that was in Studio A, and in Studio B, so happened to be Chad Blake, right?
Oh, wow.
So I walked into that room, and it was empty. It was dark. They were out. They'd taken some time off, but everything was set up for a record they were making, and so I felt a little bit like a weasel. But I thought, I'm gonna walk around and just kind of see what I see, right? And so I did it.
We've all done that.
And I walked in and I saw a few different pipes. You had microphones on one end of the pipe, and the pipe was sitting in front of a guitar amplifier, and this weird head thing that was by the drums, and we all knew, at least I knew for sure at that point, of some of the amazing things that Chad was doing.
Yeah.
Frequencies, things that you would listen to a record and be like, okay, I don't know what that is, I don't know how he did it, but I want to know.
Yeah.
Right?
I live for those moments.
And I left, that was on a Friday, and that weekend I scoured lumberyards. I just started looking for odd things because I started thinking, okay, well, I could do my version of that. And the next day I did a session where I stuck a cymbal in front of a guitar amplifier and mic'd the cymbal, in other words, the microphone pointing towards the cymbal instead of the speaker to get the reflection, which was 100% because of what I saw Chad doing, right?
Well, that's incredible.
And I'm wondering, have you ever had those kind of experiences?
Yeah, when I first started engineering, I couldn't afford a sampler, but I was blessed to be in a full-blown real studio. So I would like take a trash can and fill it full of glass, and then just drop a metal weight in there and get that splatter, and then I'd mix that in with a snare sound, but I'd have to punch it in every snare. It'd take me like 3 hours because I didn't have a sampler, so I'd have to line up the 2-track and get it rolling just at the right time and punch it in on the snare. I live for those moments. I started a song off one time. I had a glass patio table with a glass top, and I took a quarter and held it and flipped it like that. So and I mic'd that and let that start the song off real cold. And same table, I took a knife, a steak knife that had a real thin blade, and did like that, and then slid it in. So it went, up the scale as you slid it in, put that in a bridge. Yeah, I love those moments.
Were there any moments where you had the experience I had where I described where I went in the studio and saw someone else's? Did you ever have anyone that inspired you?
For me, it was a song called, everything in my life's about songs. It was a song called Close to the Edit by Art of Noise. I think that song came out in the early 90s. The group was called Art of Noise. The video had this little girl about yay tall, 3 feet tall, over made up like a prostitute. And through the video, she destroys an upright bass, a violin, a real piano, and the group was called Art of Noise. That kind of changed my life, what you can do with sounds and percussion. And then when Rhythm Nation came out, Janet Jackson, my good friend Keith Andes and I were waiting at Tower Records. You could buy the record at midnight, 11 at night, me and Keith and about 400 teenage girls are waiting in line to get our copy of Rhythm Nation. Those kind of moments, yeah. But I never got to see anybody do anything because I was in Atlanta, and at that time there weren't the big studios and stuff, and there wasn't a lot of that to see. So you had to kind of make it up yourself from records. Howard Jones had a band one time, a video with a band that had a lot of cool stuff. And then being Latin, I come from a world where you'd see these percussion tables. I don't think anybody's ever seen one of those. We should do that on the show one day, Will. Get one of the top percussion guys. As you know, they come in the studio to play a percussion. They have a table and they've got everything like brake drums and all kinds of stuff and 2 stereo mics, and they'll play a bunch of different things. The Latin percussion world kind of gave me a lot of ideas like that too. But yeah, those moments are very special.
So a lot of those kinds of ideas were just things you created in your mind. Where I guess because I was in Los Angeles and in Hollywood, where there were lots of record studios and lots of records being made, I had the opportunity to kind of just sometimes visit rooms and see things.
Yeah. I did too later on when I got. Let me ask you a question. Do you feel that a big part of what we do is solve problems? Like we're given multiple sets of problems that we just have to solve sometimes. So a lot of my ideas sometimes don't come from a creative source. They just come from a need to solve a particular problem. I needed a reverb, didn't have one, so I solved that problem. Sometimes you're given a guitar sound and there's a certain problem attached to that sound, so you just solve the problem. Or you hear a sound in your head and you don't know how to get it, so you solve that problem. It seems like a lot of what we do is problem solving. Do you feel that way?
100%. What I do, especially if I'm doing an entire record, right, is I'll go through each song over a couple days, so maybe as many as 3 or 5 in a day, and I solve what are the problems, identify what the problems are, after I have my first impressions. So I'm just like you about the first impression. Then I go through and I solve the problems, and then by the time I get to the 4th day, I get to now start the record with those problems gone.
Oh, that's cool.
Right? And just hear the record for what it is. And then, like the Golden Gate Bridge, I go back again, carve all 10 very quickly again, and by the time I've done that 2 or 3 times, I'm now just mixing emotionally. There's I don't need to think about the technical issues because I've fixed them all.
That's
right?
the point to get to, is that emotional part.
And now I get to just mix. I don't need to think about, oh, that's not right, I got to fix this, fix that. I already did all that work.
That's cool.
I'd like to ask the question of when you're mixing, right? What goes through your mind? What are your parameters and thoughts about how much level to put, on tape or in Pro Tools, whatever it might be? Because obviously the mastering person, right, is going to get your mix.
Right.
Do you think about the transients? Do you think about the level? Do you think about what he's going to do? What's the handoff in your mind?
Well, I'm blessed because I get to work with a very small select group of mastering engineers that I've got a 20-year history with. So I work pretty exclusively with Brad Blackwood, with Brian Gardner, with several of the guys at Sterling, Tom Coyne and Chris, although Chris is out on his own now, Ted Jensen. So I've got a small hand group of people I work with, and so, for example, recently I was working on a song and I slammed the piss out of it, and it sounded good. I liked it. So I called Brian. I said, "Man, I'm gonna hand you something. What do you want me to do?" And Brian said, "Man, send me slammed and send me one a little less slammed, and just pick what you like. Let me get a shot at it." Brad Blackwood, I sent him something recently. I said, "I slammed it, Brad. What should I do?" He said, "Send it. Just send it. I'll make it work." So my guys are pretty good about working with me. In fact, Brad actually called me back and said, "Man, if you can just do this one little tweak, I think the mix will be better." And he was kind of nervous about asking me to change my mix. And I'm like, "No, Brad, I love that. We're a team, man." So I made his tweak, and sure enough, it just got better. So I think the world of mastering is more a collaborative effort now, just like mixing is a collaborative effort with a producer. No longer do producers just stop the production, wipe the track clean, and give it to us. We kind of finish the mix part of the production for them now. Mastering is now a process where if your mastering engineer doesn't work with you, get another one. Find guys that finish the mix part of the I painted myself in a little word corner there, that actually finish the mix for you and then continue on mastering. So a little pet peeve of mine right now is there's never not been loudness wars. The reason most of these mastering houses exist is because they found a way to make their records louder than everybody else. There was a time when we were probably working at 85 nanowebers and somebody came up with a way to hit 150, then somebody came up with a way to hit 185, then somebody kept...
You're right.
So we always strive to get louder and louder and louder. TV commercials, louder, louder, louder than the program material. Movie trailers, louder, louder, louder. So loudness is just a natural thing. Everybody wants to be louder because Fletcher Munson says that louder sounds better. Now, in a laptop computer, if you have a bunch of dynamics and a bunch of low levels, it's not going to come through the same way a piece of material that's artistically and properly limited. Now, there's bad limiting and there's good limiting. If you do it correctly and musically, it's going to jump through those speakers and just give you an advantage over every other song that guy plays that day.
Right.
It's a pain in the ass to find the little volume knob and punch it 4 times and see the little bars go across. Same thing on your iPhone. So I don't think that it's appropriate to complain about the loudness wars and slamming a mix. I think get off your lazy ass, master the process, and figure out a way to make it musical and work within the context and framework of your mix, and then hand that to the mastering engineer. And if he's not going to work with you, find another one. Because I had happened to me a couple of times, and a couple of my friends, they handed a not compressed slammed mix to a mastering guy. The guy didn't make it as loud as other things on the record, and a guy, I've known a couple of guys that have lost mixes by turning in an uncompressed original mix. So it's the world we live in. It's not going to change. We're not going to go back to wire recording or cassettes or whatever. It's the world we live in. It's MP3s are going to be here for a few years. Master it. Don't bitch about it. Master it. Make it work for you. Make it work within the framework of your philosophy about your process and the philosophy of your mix. I can make things exciting slammed. I can make things exciting in an MP3. Take the time to listen to what your mix sounds like as an MP3. That might be a starting spot.
Right.
And then maximize all the different things so that it works for today's audience on today's technology.
So sometimes that level could be, as you said, slammed. So I'm imagining seeing those bars in Pro Tools right in the red.
Oh, yeah. Well, in Pro Tools, I learned the hard way. You got to work about 3 dB below zero. The guys that I came up under, it was the redder the better. I mean, our meters used to just hover on zero, you know.
Right.
And that's one of the things about consoles. You have to learn how to do a different way. And
So you like it to be 3 dB lower.
I like to.
So there's no reds. If I look at your mix, I'm not going to see reds.
Never. Think of zero as a ceiling in your house, in your studio. Nothing's going to go above that ceiling. So the more you try to cram up there, the more things are competing for the same space sonically. So if you've got transients in your mix, you got to leave a little room for those little boogers to go above where your mix is. And then don't be afraid to expand going into your limiter so you can increase the dynamics before you squash them again. And that kind of helps. And then try and experiment with different amounts of limiting. Try different limiters. Not every limiter works in every circumstance. So sometimes an L2007 works, sometimes Ozone 5 works, sometimes the maximizer in UAD works. Sometimes 2 of them together work. Just experiment. It's our profession. It's fun. It's great to just have plugins that you can just put on and not have to tell your assistant to patch something up. It's a wonderful thing. So the loudness wars are a non-issue.
Right. Now we're going to do sort of a modified batter's box.
Yes.
All right. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to say some words, and I want, as you would say, what comes to your mind.
Okay.
All right? Punch.
API 550.
Attack.
Vitalizer SPL.
Attitude.
Mid-range.
Sub.
VOG, Little Labs.
Bass.
Massey VT3, the little 3-knob plug-in.
Highs.
GML 8200, plug-in wise, the MDW.
Lows.
R-Bass,
Power.
mid-range.
Beauty.
Jack Joseph Puig. You get a close-up of those shoes. Beauty is a balance. Perfectly balanced mix, balance.
Oh, what a fabulous answer. I like that.
The shoes or the balance?
No, the balance. It's fantastic. Because we didn't really get to touch on the balance too much, and I was thinking about when you're discussing the different bands earlier. For me, the most important thing I've been told by people I know that we both respect is it's all about balance.
100%. Balance gives you an opportunity to exaggerate things, to emphasize things, to draw the listener's ear to things when you want them to listen to that. It's like a painting. You don't look at everything on a painting simultaneously. Your eye is drawn by the skill of the artist around the painting. The beauty of balance is your ear is drawn around the mix through that in panning by how you manipulate balance. So balance is the most creative tool we have in mixing.
Okay. Color.
Dark.
Dark. When I say color, you think of dark.
I have no idea why. I'm playing the game correctly.
All right.
I like mixes that have a little darkness to them, but more in a feel sometimes. I don't like happy mixes.
Distortion.
A beautiful, wonderful, rich collection of harmonics, misnamed.
Color.
Tonality, frequencies.
David, I have to, thank you both personally and professionally for this insane opportunity. I feel like Barbara Walters that got to interview, JFK or something, remarkable person like yourself, not just as a talent, right, but as I keep saying, what you've brought to the industry professionally.
Thanks, Jack.
This will go down as one of my favorite moments of my life. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, that's too much pressure on me. But I mean, it's my pleasure. Just talking with you. We've been friends for 20 odd years, I guess, maybe 17 or 18, and this is a good opportunity to tell you you've been an important part of my career on any number of levels. You were one of the first people that kind of put that certification on my forehead that hey, this guy's okay. So anytime, any place, anywhere, as always, whatever you need from me, and I'm always there to help you out, man. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
My friend.
All right. Thank you.
Well, I hope you guys got as much out of that as I got. That was a very special time, a very special moment, and I thank JJP so much.
I've had, since I've known you for so long, one of the things that I've had the pleasure of watching occasionally, not all the time, is how you and JJP's relationship is. I've been at a number of parties where you guys go off in the corner and you hang for hours, and he was an early guest on the show that gave this show credibility, and really cool to
True friend, every sense of the word.
and what folks should know, because Will and I did all the behind the scenes meeting, this was driven by Vintage King and JJP. He wanted to do it this way. Sorry we fooled you. You didn't know that you were going to go be interviewed.
I had no clue. I thought I was going for something else.
And absolutely brilliant. And for somebody who knows you, it was great to see you, to get to know you differently through somebody who really knows you.
It's a lot more fun to be the interviewer than to be the interviewee.
Yeah,
it's embarrassing because, I've made up so many lies about my career along the way. It's hard to keep all that crap in order.
And JJP knows them all. That's what's so great.
Okay.
Could not have been cooler. Thanks, JJP. Thanks, Vintage King. And Dave, why don't you take us home?
All right, guys, there ain't a whole lot to say. I'll get emotional if I talk about this too much more. It was a wonderful moment. I'm proud to be able to share it with you, and we'll see you next week.